Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. We got the whole gang here, and today's topic is going to be on how to adjust habits. So, obviously, habits is a really big part of any kind of competition or especially competitive fighting games. So, going to be a big deal in Smash Bros. And of course, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you guys feel like are the best ways to adjust habits. We'd love to hear your guys' opinion, and we can just get straight into the topic. I'm pretty simple when it comes down to adjusting habits. I think one of the best things to do is to just not do the thing that you were doing before. And even if you lose or you're not finding success with it, at least you can see the other avenues, right? So I think some of the bigger ones are, what do you do in the corner? What do you do in scramble? I think scramble situations is probably one of the biggest things you want to have the most amount of mix-ups, because most of the time you're towards like the middle of the stage, so you have every direction you can go. And like, for example, I love to jump in scrambles, which is like I've lost so many games / sets / stocks because of that, just because Fox wants to be in the air setting up an air, right? It's just a really good spot for Fox, but obviously if you call it out, Fox really light, and then you can get blown back for it. So knowing that you have a specific habit in a specific scenario, you can just be like, okay, as long as I do anything but jump, you gather information on what other things you can do in that scenario, right? And see how they kind of pan out. So that's my mentality when it comes to it. And then kind of pinpointing locations. I guess another very common habit lower level players have is like double jumping at disadvantage, especially getting sent off stage, right? That's probably like the most common thing you can blow someone up for, and just like take stocks at 20-30%. So yeah, I think pinpointing where and trying to find these habits. Usually I like how in a previous episode Ramses was talking about how Ramses was talking about how you what was it, you lose stocks. Damn, I lost my train of thought. Where's Tony?
Tony was having a laughing fit. I don't know what was that.
Yeah,
Tony, come back!
Tony's gone, dude.
Yeah, I'm here. No, I'm just losing it. So I am here.
Okay.
I'm listening.
But yeah, essentially where you lose your stock. There we go. So where you lose your stock and kind of rewinding to the neutral interaction, and there's usually some kind of habit there, or where you take a lot of damage, and kind of rewinding it back to where you lost neutral, and maybe click it back like one or two interactions. What was the decision making there that got you to that point? So yeah, I think for me, when I think about habits in general, it's all about finding the habits and then doing in those situations, just not doing the habit to gather information and have yourself experience different options in those scenarios and see where it's successful, where it's not successful. Obviously, there's going to be, Fox jumping in a scramble situation might be really, really good against characters that just can't KO you vertically because you'll never lose the stock, right? But then there's other characters that can just blow you up at really, really low percents, depending on the situation. So knowing your opponent's toolkit and knowing when to adjust habits is also extremely important. But I think the ability to find the habits and the ability to not do said habit, and that's just usually you have to put a lot of thought into it, right? There's the phase of when you're trying to adjust a habit where you have to put a lot of thought and effort into it to the point where you're probably going to play worse, but going through that phase is very, very important. That's my thoughts on adjusting habits. Bam, what do you think?
I think one thing you said, honestly, I think one thing that you said that is important, that go and experience new things, right? It is so often that people simply will not even try to, like, even when they're like, oh yeah, this is a bad habit of mine. And it's like, okay, but what are you doing about it? Like, the first step is like, you gotta actually start doing different things, right? And then I think the second thing is, once you start doing different things, like sometimes you'll do that one thing and it will just change and it's all good, right? But mostly that tends not to be the case especially until you get to a certain level where you kind of figure out like, oh, this is how I need to change quickly, right? When you're starting off, usually it's like you don't know. You just know you need to change the thing. The thing that you're doing right now is not working, right? So once you start doing new things and experiencing them, you're probably going to drop off at like your skill level and all those things. And you have to be committed to the change for the sake of finding something that you're okay with repeating over and over again, or something that is like worthwhile to make you get to the next level, right? Because sometimes people go like, this happens all the time. This is a very standard human affair. Oh, I need to change here. I start doing the thing that I'm changing. Like, say, you know what? Screw it. Let's talk about like, if someone's doing alcoholism, right? Like, say they were like alcoholic, they drink. They're like, all right, I need to change here. People usually do that because they're having some issue in their life, right? Or something that it is like, it's the coping mechanism, right? And so they need to fill that void. They try to find some things. Maybe that's not the thing. Then you just kind of go back, right? It's very easy to kind of sink back into things, and because that's your comfort zone, right? That's what is familiar to you. But like, it's not just about trying the thing, but it's also being like, I'm going to be committed to doing a change here, with the understanding that it's probably going to feel worse until it gets better, right? And that's like a really, really big thing, and very, very important when you're trying to change your habits. And also ultimately just seeing it as like, when you're not just taking away that habit, it's always about, how do I put something in its place, right? How am I swapping this thing out? How am I refining this thing in a way that takes into account other aspects that I may have like simply just dismissed, in my initial state of that habit, or whatever it may be. But I think those things are like really, really important, and it takes time. Understanding that it takes time, right? Understanding that you're going to have to be conscious about it and focus about it, and you're going to have to reflect about that. You're going to have to do some more analysis than just, we talk about a lot, than just playing, turning off your brain and playing and playing and playing and playing. It's very easy to do that. Sometimes it's very therapeutic to do that. But you have to be, when you're taking the change, it takes time, right? And it takes you being conscious about that and being intentional about that. And I think that goes a long way until getting to that growth. And it's going to be small steps, but you will eventually get there. But you have to have that in your mind from the start. Otherwise, you're probably not going to finish. It's going to seem too insurmountable. Oh my goodness, I'm not where I want to go already. After 2 seconds, I'm going to go back, right? It's like when someone's like, hey, I'm going to write a book. They can't even finish a page. Or like, hey, that's too much, man. I got to do 120 pages, blah, blah, blah. Every writer in the world is never starting with, hey, I'm just going to write a book, right? Like, you have your idea right, about it. But ultimately, it's like, okay, how do I get the idea? How do I get an outline? How do I get a page? How do I get to 2 pages? How do I get a chapter? Right? You have to break things down. That's the easiest way to learn things and to refine things and to improve yourself. So you have to take that all into account when you're adjusting those habits there. But that's kind of what I have to say about that. But Tony, what do you have to say about adjusting your habits?
So the first thing I will say is that habits are a form of behavior as we define it. Typically as just being repetitious behaviors. However, there are multiple subtypes of this. So there are habits where there are patterns where there don't need to be, but it's also worth noting that sometimes there are so few numbers of possibilities that you can actually have something that is just a simple pattern, independent of whether it is a habit or not. So things like ledge options. If you neutral get up twice, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a ledge get up habit. So as things become simpler, any given repetition can be mistaken as a habit, but likewise, I say it this way because that means that if you have a habit that is just too complex to be observed, because let's say you always neutral get up, then ledge roll, then get up attack, then ledge jump in that order. If you have that habit, it is entirely reasonable at most locals in the entire country of the US that if you go through and you win the tournament, there is not a single player in that venue that is going to pick up on that series as being a habit, even though that is, by definition, a habit. So how simple that habit is, it has a big impact on how relevant it is for you to want to change it. The next level of how we want to look at it is, what is the risk reward of this particular sequence? So yes, if somebody knows you're always going to ledge jump, but which timing you're picking on your ledge jump is what's in play. Just because the opponent knows that it's coming doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to punish it consistently or that they're going to be able to punish it with a substantially punishing point for what the position says it should be. Since, again, going back to what we were saying before, since your options are already so simplified, the likelihood of them finding or predicting a given outcome is a higher percentage chance just because there's fewer sides on the proverbial die. So when we look at it this way, there's another thing we want to look at is just because your opponent knows what's happening doesn't necessarily mean that they can actually counter it. So if I tell you duck hunt is going to pull can at go, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything you can do about it. It's going to be matchup specific on the context of what you can do about it. But generally, it's assumed certain things like Diddy Kong's going to pull a banana, Pac-Man's going to start pulling a bonus fruit, etc., etc. And these are things that you can know are happen at the start of every single game, and not have the opponent punished for. In fact, if they aren't being punished for it substantially hard enough, it's probably a mistake for them to stop. And that's why you'll have one of the best players on the planet, T, is someone who has some of the most defined habits in that area of skill. And yet, even when players know that it's coming, sometimes they'll still get hit, because it's a matter of if the actual structure of your game plan, of your tactics, is so effective, if the execution checks that you are providing to your opponent are so challenging, then just because they know what's coming doesn't necessarily mean that it's a mistake. So what we want to look for then is either A, the habits that are getting you particularly punished, or B, the habits that are just unnecessarily obvious. So if you can do 1,000 different things at Go, but you still choose to always fast fall towards center stage every single time, just run off the platform if there is one, that's not necessary. It could be stronger than everything else in a vacuum, but if you're doing that every single time and your opponent knows about it and they punish you for it the first time and you can't stop doing it, that is the sign of an ideal habit where we want to probably change that for something else. And so what we want to do to establish that new habit is we have to ask ourselves, well, first of all, what should I have been doing instead? Or alternatively, if my opponent is catching on to this habit, what are they opening themselves up to? And just treat it like you would any other kind of mix-up. So if I always dash grab every time I see a shield, and you know that I'm always going to dash grab every time you can see a shield, that means you could just shield and then up smash, and I'm just going to dash right into it with a dash grab every single time. Now, if that is something that you particularly want, then that's awesome. But if that's a matter of, well, I know my opponent's going to up smash every single time that I see them shield, and I just can't stop myself from dash grabbing it, then that means you need to start reacting to shields with like a run up and forward smash yourself, and just start getting that charge. Now, especially obvious for Meta Knight mains, of course. So the point that we're making here is that helps us identify what we want to adjust as a follow-up habit, and then our implementation on establishing that new habit, or rather, our odds of hitting a new habit are by how much we practice it. So if I were to say this same example habit, even if you were to spend an entire day practicing doing everything from Go except for running off the center stage, if you go and you play a serious set for an hour, you are very likely to still go run off and fast fall to center stage every single time for maybe 2 or 3 times, and then you'll get really annoyed with yourself. But the reason for that is because all you can do is, assuming you have a sufficient threshold of practice to establish that habit or behavior, is you are a product of your own practice, for better and for worse. So if you don't like the volume of your established practice that leads to your behavior set, then what you can do is you can start introducing new behaviors to take up a larger portion of that. But assuming, again, that you have already put in practice time, the more practice you have already put into establishing that initial habit, the more practice that it's going to be required to replace that behavior with something new, because it's a matter of proportion. If you have 1,000 hours in the game, you can spend a week straight practicing, and that still makes up less than 1/6 of the time that you've spent probably retroactively playing that same pattern or position. And so what you're going to have there is you're just going to find yourself overwhelmed by the effect that you're expecting versus what's going to actually happen, because of humans' inability to run these numbers. And usually what it feels like is everything I've been doing is toward this new behavior, and yet I still keep doing the old behavior. Why is that? That's just not fair. And so that is why. It's because you're a victim of your own previous practice. And so that is how we identify it, how we are going to go ahead and implement it, and then what you can expect from that habit adjustment. But keep in mind, there's no such thing as a good habit or bad habit. It's a matter of is the effect that this is having within the context of the situation, like these particular opponents, something that I want, or do I want to adjust it? Because even if it's the opposite of what you want, it's a matter of adjusting it. It's like a composition. You can add new behaviors to try and provide a new dosage, but just like if you were to take a can of soda and then add a cup of water to it, it's going to be a lot of liquid and a lot of it's going to be not soda, but you're never going to get rid of it. It's just a matter of you're always going to have that composite. So, with that said, Ramses, you're quite the mix master yourself. What do you usually teach with habits?
It's good. I think you guys altogether touched upon a lot of good points. I think one thing that has helped me a lot in conveying what I think about habits is to kind of frame habits as a lack of choice. That's what a habit is at the end of the day. Is like you find yourself in a situation and you're not making a choice. You're doing the same thing over and over, right? And so when we think about being at that like top level, what differentiates top level players from like the next layer of player skill level? And at the end of the day, to me, it's often that they are able to control more of the game than like high level players can or mid level players can. And because they can control more of the game, they get better results. They can win more matches because they control things that other players don't. And they find themselves being more consistent. And so how can you control as much as possible? Well, usually it's by making as many decisions as possible, right? And also being aware of all of these different decisions. And so a habit kind of directly makes us less consistent, because when we think about a habit, it again, it's a lack of choice on our part. And so whether a habit is positive or negative, if we're not making any choices, is up to the opponent. And so we are essentially making the outcome of our game random, because if we find an opponent that can punish it, we lose, or well, we suffer under it. And if they cannot punish it, then we win. And so who is controlling the outcome of the match? Or is it us or them? It's them, right? And so I think habits, if we frame them as a lack of choice, I think you have the best understanding of what a habit is. And I think that also contextualizes a lot of what Tony says about how habits can be positive things. Because once we make the choice to implement a habit, we are aware of our lack of choice. And so we are choosing not to choose. And choosing not to choose, by the way, this is something like, if you're listening, you're probably not a top like 20 player in the world, and so you're probably not at a level where you get like where choosing not to choose is a valuable thing. This is like a very high level optimization. It's to say, I'm not going to be making a decision here.
Not top 20 in the world.
You are, Bam. You are.
Thank God. Jeez.
That Rano.
Oh man. God, like I'm so big brain every time I hit the.
Bro has like 1100 elo or something. Holy moly, incredible. That's incredible. Like more than 1,000. That's one of the bigger numbers in the world, honestly. This is one of the bigger numbers
in the world. That's the one. You're crazy.
I'm just saying, 1,100, bro, dude. That's like more than our combined IQ, like barely.
Oh yes, true.
Probably. No, but so like when we can decide that a habit is a good idea, when we can decide to not make a choice, that's where habits become more powerful. Now, there's ways to mask habits, like Tony said, right? If you have like a rotating set of options that you just rotate through in a set order and you make that a habit, essentially we hide the downsides of the habits, right? And so it's not like habits are all negative, but I think the upsides of habits are mostly there. One, when like Tony described, you hide them very, very, very well. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to reduce the mental stack, right? So like you're hiding the fact that you're not making a choice, so you don't have to think about that. And that gives you room to think about other things. And so that kind of like plays into the second thing that makes habits good. It's like if you are relying on a habit when you realize that the opponent is not making any choices either. So you can say, well, I'm normally not going to look for like ledge jumps because I cannot really punish them. I'm playing Shulk, not the best juggle game. And so if they have a habit of jumping, I can make it a habit to not really care about that, because like even caring about it will make me play better, but maybe I can spend that mental energy elsewhere better, right? And so habits become powerful only when you really factor in the mental stack and like the energy and the how you manage your energy, how you manage your focus. And so the way to think about it, right, is that every single thing, every single concept that you're aware of in Smash is a tool, right? And so a habit is a tool as well. And so the more you're optimizing, the more of your tools you want to use. And the reason a lot of people suffer from habits is because they don't know how to use a tool. Habits is a tool that is very, very hard to use because the concepts behind habits, are just extremely high level, right? Like in terms of trying to make it positive. And so for most people, your goal is that you want to get rid of your habit, right? Why? Because again, you want to start making choices, and so introducing choice allows us to control the situation more. And so how do you go about removing habits? Well, already a lot of good advice on the table so far. What I would say is I would start, if you have a habit, I would start by thinking, where does this habit come from? Because a habit usually has one of two sources. So source number one is positive. So in other words, this habit has worked out for you so far, and so you've come to rely on it. Like your brain is essentially trying to optimize your energy expenditures, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm at a disadvantage. I can do like 20 things, but you know, like I'm always playing as my buddy Mike, and like whenever I jump, Mike never punishes it. So like I'm gonna jump. You do that for like 5 sessions, and your brain is addicted. It's like, okay, well, you know, instead of making all these different choices, I'm just gonna like take this shorter path. It's giving me good feedback. It's nice. I like the dopamine. Let's keep doing it, right? And so that's a positive part of a habit. Then there's a negative part, which is like being scared out of your mind. So like for me, when I was 16 and playing Brawl, I played Falco, and that game it had edge hogging. And so what would I do? I would always side B to the stage. Why? I did not want to get edge hogged. And it wasn't like, I didn't get positive feedback from that, because like Mr. R would beat my ass every time I did it. He would like fully charge shield breaker, tipper me, kill me at 40. And then like next stock, Lil Ramses runs off stage, side B's onto the center again, die again, like like freaking clockwork. And if you're a Brawl player, I know you know what I mean. And so these habits, they're shortcuts, because the situation is so complex. Our brain's like, it's too complex. I'm overcome by emotion, positive or negative, and then it follows kind of like that shortcut. And so think about the role of your habit in the situation, right? And once you understand the role of your habit, then you can add the choices surrounding it. So either you're going to want to reinforce it if it's a strong option, right? So saying like, okay, double jumping out of disadvantage might be your best option. Maybe you're playing Greninja, right? Amazing double jump. Double jumping out of disadvantage, probably your best option. Okay, so what can I do about it? How can I build like a set of choices that make sense? How can I understand what information I need to change that choice? And that kind of gets you going. And so what we need, once we have kind of like understood, like, okay, well, this is a good or a bad option. Okay, what choices can complement this option, and why do they complement this option? Then we essentially need one more step, and that is awareness. And so the first thing you need to do, once you understand this, why do I have this habit? What can I do to make it a more consistent option, right? So like, I don't think you should get rid of habits. I think you should turn them again into choices. The final step is to become aware. And so in other words, once you have figured this all out, all you got to do is get into a game and start recognizing the situation in which your habit comes up. Don't try to fix it yet, right? When you find yourself there, don't try to like force yourself into doing the right thing. Like that's going to burn you out. The first skill is to just be aware of the fact that you're doing this, be aware of the fact that you're in the situation, and just start getting used to that awareness. And once you have practiced that awareness, then you can introduce that choice that you have kind of developed. And so like Bam said, it's a lot of work, right? Like it's a lot of like understanding, hey, like why am I doing this? What is good about it? What's bad about it? What are these other choices that complement it? And so it can feel like a lot of work to get rid of a habit. Again, like Tony said, if it's a habit that you've been doing for a while, you're fighting against like maybe years of muscle memory. But a lot of work does not exist, right? Time is an illusion. We can only live in the present, chat. Yes. We can only live in the present. And so if you ever find yourself face to face with a lot of work, like imagine there's like a pile of 1,000 dishes. How do you get rid of the pile of dishes? You wash one dish at a time. And so that's all you can do, whether it's 10 or 1,000, what you're doing is the same. You're washing one dish at a time. And so when you're working on your habits, all you can do is just do the thing that you can control, do the task in front of you. And this is a rephrasing of a very cliche phrase. Trust the process, right? And Adjusting the process is all about doing what you can do. And so what you can do in these situations is try to understand. And once you have that understanding, try to build awareness. And once you have understanding and awareness, then you can tap into the control.
So I will definitely, I cannot underscore enough about what Ramses is saying about control. That is ultimately, like, if there is a tagline you should take away from this, it's that your ultimate goal is that whether you're right or you're wrong at anything, you should be able to choose the other option or a different option. And that's going to always be the limit to your ability to adapt and adjust in anything. Another shortcut for establishing a habit that you are less likely to need to fix before you start trying to leave intermediate stages. Anytime you find a redundant situation, so this is especially goes out to our mid-level theory crafters out there. When you look at things and you have a bunch of correct solutions to the same problems, like let's say I could hit somebody with Mithra up air, or I could hit them with Mithra nair, and then either way, I'm going to string this into the same juggle or similar juggle. If you have a list of those redundancies, and for the record, this is part of what makes a character good, or a facet of what makes a character good, is the more redundancies you have, you can actually just practice rotating through these redundant behaviors or these redundancies for getting the same things that we want. And when you do so, what's going to happen is your opponent isn't going to recognize that you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, because you're doing the same thing 4 different ways from their perspective. And so, again, most people aren't going to pick up on that. And so right then and there, it is entirely likely that you won't even run into a player who notices that that's what's happening. So when, especially when players are starting to push more complex game plans and are having difficulty finding the mental bandwidth, or their mental stack, I should say, to do so, one thing that you can do is that if you can shorthand by actually practicing that inbuilt redundancy or that inbuilt rotation, then it frees up a lot of your mental stack of trying to think through an entire layer of RPS, because you'll just be rotating something innately, and your opponent isn't going to recognize that there is a habit there. But in practice, what that has you do is you just show up to training mode and you practice doing your same basic BMDs, and then just hit confirming off of your same basics that you were going to practice anyway. But because you're practicing it in such an order, it's just naturally going to be too complex for the simple human mind to pick up right away, surface level at least. So, pro tip.
All right, sounds good. Well, if you guys don't have anything else to say on the topic, we'll be wrapping it up. I hope you guys did enjoy the content. Again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys want to ask us questions directly, you can also subscribe to our Patreon, and you can go ahead and there's a channel.
No, Charles.
What's up?
Subscribe to our Discord, not our Patreon.
Yes, Discord. Getting a mix.
There's no patrons at the university.
Yes. Yes, please subscribe to the Discord, and you can go ahead and ask us questions directly there. And yeah, until next time, class dismissed.